She looked me in the eye and said I didn't fit into her family's Christmas. I stood there, in the house I had paid for, protected, and filled with memories for over 30 years. And suddenly, I was being asked to step aside. They weren't angry. They weren't shouting. They were certain. Certain that the house would be theirs one day. Certain that I would quietly fade into the background. Certain that Christmas belonged to them now. So I smiled. I listened. And I made a decision they never saw coming. Because when someone tells you that you don't belong in your own home, sometimes the only answer left. My name is Margaret Collins, and before anyone decided I no longer belonged, I had belonged everywhere in that house. The morning of December 20th began the same way it had for decades. I woke before sunrise, my joints quietly protesting as my feet touched the cold wooden floor. The house was silent, not empty, but familiar. The kind of silence that only comes from a home that knows your footsteps. I pulled my cardigan tighter and walked down the hallway, my fingers brushing the wall where I had once measured my son's height with a pencil. The marks were still there. Daniel Collins had been so proud when he reached that line at 13. I smiled at the memory, then sighed. The kitchen light flickered on, revealing the worn oak table I'd refinished myself 20 years ago. Every scratch held a memory. Every chair had once held a different version of my family. I filled the kettle and looked out the window at the front yard, where frost covered the grass like powdered sugar. Christmas was 5 days away. By noon, the house would no longer be quiet. Daniel and his wife, Rebecca Collins, were arriving from Boston with the kids. Emily, Noah, and little Lucas. They stayed with me every Christmas now, not because they asked, because it was understood. This was Grandma's house, the family house, the future inheritance, as Rebecca had once joked casually, a joke that hadn't felt funny even then. I got to work immediately. Dough for sugar cookies, cranberry sauce simmering slowly. The old artificial tree waited in the basement, its ornaments still wrapped in newspaper from years past. I moved carefully, deliberately. 72 didn't mean useless. Not yet. As I stirred the pot, my thoughts drifted backward. I bought this house in 1991 after my husband, Richard Collins, passed away suddenly. Daniel was 14. I worked 2 jobs to keep these walls standing. Missed vacations, missed comforts. But the mortgage never missed a payment. After Richard died, Christmas became my anchor. If I could make Christmas warm, maybe the rest of life wouldn't feel so cold. At 10:47 a.m., tires crunched against the driveway. They were early. I wiped my hands and reached the door just as Rebecca stepped inside already on her phone. "Daniel, tell her we're here," she said into the screen. Even though she was standing in my doorway, she ended the call and smiled politely. "Hi, Margaret." There it was, that smile, not unkind, just distant. "Rebecca," I said warmly. "You made good time." The kids rushed past me, coats half off, voices echoing through the halls. Emily ran toward the living room. "Grandma, is the tree up yet?" "Not yet, sweetheart," I said. "We'll do it together." Daniel followed behind, carrying bags. He kissed my cheek quickly. "Hey, Mom." He didn't look at me when he said it. The house filled fast. Laughter, footsteps, Rebecca directing where suitcases should go. "Let's put ours in the guest room," she said. "It's closer to the bathroom." I nodded. Of course. That room had once been Daniel's. Rebecca's eyes scanned the house, slow and calculating. "This place still has great bones," she said. "You've maintained it well." Maintained. Like a museum. As lunch passed, I noticed things I never had before. Rebecca rearranged decorations without asking. Corrected my stories. That's not how Daniel remembers it. Spoke about me instead of to me. While I washed dishes, her voice drifted from the living room. Once we renovate, this space will open up beautifully. I froze. Once. My hands shook as I dried the plate. That night, when the house finally grew quiet again, I sat alone in the living room. The tree lights were still off. The ornaments waited in their box. For the first time in 30 years, Christmas felt crowded, not with people, but with expectations. And as my reflection stared back at me from the dark window, one thought settled heavily in my chest. They weren't visiting anymore. They were waiting. By the next morning, the house no longer felt like mine. It felt managed. I woke to cabinets opening and closing downstairs. Rebecca was already awake. Her voice travelled through the vents, crisp, efficient, confident, like someone who believed mornings were meant to be organised, not felt. I dressed slowly, choosing the soft blue sweater Richard used to love. When I reached the kitchen, the smell of coffee greeted me. Not the brand I bought, but the expensive one Rebecca preferred. She stood at the counter, phone in one hand, a legal pad in the other. "Good morning," I said. "Oh, morning, Margaret," she replied without looking up. "I made a schedule." That word again. "For Christmas week," she added, "just to keep things smooth." She slid the pad toward me. "Monday, grocery shopping. Rebecca Tuesday, kids' activities. Rebecca Wednesday, cleaning service. Rebecca Thursday, Christmas Eve dinner. Rebecca's menu. Friday, Christmas Day. Rebecca hosting. In my house." Daniel entered, adjusting his tie. "Mum, Rebecca's just trying to help." Help had felt very different when I was younger. As the day went on, Rebecca moved through the house with certainty. Pantry reorganised, cookie jars moved higher, the wreath on the door replaced. "This one matches the aesthetic better," she said. The aesthetic. At lunch, she clasped her hands together. "So, for Christmas Eve," she smiled, "we're keeping it smaller this year." "Just family?" I asked. "Yes," she replied smoothly, "but not extended." Silence settled over the table. Daniel stared at his plate. "We thought you might rest that evening," Rebecca continued. "My parents have their own traditions." "And where would I be?" I asked. "Upstairs? Or maybe out," she said gently. "Just for the night." My sister had been dead for 6 years. "I usually host Christmas Eve," I said quietly. "Yes," she replied, "but families evolve." Something inside me shifted. That night, as I walked the halls, touching door frames and photographs, I remembered the lawyer, the paperwork, the decisions I had made quietly years ago. By morning, sadness had hardened into clarity. When Rebecca announced she'd scheduled a contractor, I smiled. "Planning is important," I said. She smiled back, satisfied. She had no idea, because while she planned for a future she assumed was guaranteed, I was remembering the past, and the documents that proved this house was still mine. Christmas Eve arrived quietly, the way storms sometimes do. No thunder, no warning, just pressure in the air. Snow began falling before dawn, thick and slow, softening the world outside while something inside the house grew sharp and unsettled. I stood at the kitchen window with a mug of tea, watching the front yard disappear under white, trying to steady myself. Rebecca had been awake for hours. Furniture shifted slightly, decorations were adjusted. Familiar spaces were altered just enough to remind me that I was no longer in charge, not even in my own home. Her parents, Linda and Thomas Harrington, were arriving that afternoon. I stayed out of the way. By noon, the house smelled unfamiliar. Catered food, expensive spices, nothing I had cooked. Rebecca watched as staff moved efficiently through the kitchen. "They do this professionally," she said lightly. "It'll be easier for everyone." Easier. When Linda and Thomas arrived, Rebecca transformed. Her posture straightened. Her laughter grew brighter. She led them through the house proudly. "This is where we spend Christmas," she said. "It's such a special place." "We." Linda kissed my cheek politely. "Margaret, you've kept the home lovely." "Thank you," I replied. Dinner preparations overtook the kitchen, and suddenly there was no place for me to stand, no task to claim. I drifted to the edges of rooms I had once commanded. Emily tugged gently at my sleeve. "Grandma, aren't you eating with us?" Before I could answer, Rebecca stepped in smoothly. "Sweetie, Grandma might eat later. Tonight's a little busy." I looked at Daniel. He looked away. Around 5 o'clock, Rebecca touched my arm. "Margaret, could we talk for a moment?" She guided me into the hallway near the stairs. Her voice was calm, careful, rehearsed. "I really want tonight to go smoothly," she said. "My parents value a certain atmosphere." I waited. She inhaled, then said it. "I don't think you really fit into our family's Christmas this year." The words were quiet. They still cut. "Fit," I repeated. "It's nothing personal," she continued quickly. "Traditions matter, and sometimes dynamics change." I searched her face for discomfort. There was none. "So, where should I be?" I asked. She gestured upward. "You could relax upstairs, or maybe step out for the evening." Step out. From my own home. "I see," I said softly. Her shoulders relaxed. "Thank you for understanding." I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. In my bedroom, I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, 72 years old, widowed, mother, grandmother, uninvited. Laughter floated up from downstairs. Glasses clinked. Music played, not the carols I loved, but something polished and hollow. There was a knock. Daniel stood there, uncomfortable, uncertain. "Mum." Rebecca didn't mean. "She meant exactly what she said," I replied gently. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe after dinner." "No," I interrupted. "There's no need." He nodded and left. I looked around the room. The dresser Richard built, the quilt my mother stitched, the life I had layered carefully over decades. Something shifted inside me then. Not anger. Resolution. At 8:30, I went downstairs. Conversations paused when they saw me. "I just wanted to wish you all a Merry Christmas Eve," I said calmly. Rebecca smiled tightly. "Of course." I put on my coat. "I'll be out for a while." Cold air greeted me like truth. I drove aimlessly, lights blurring through tears I refused to let fall. When I returned, the house was quiet. Guests gone, dishes cleaned. On the counter, a note waited. "Hope you had a restful evening." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my purse. Then I sat at the kitchen table, my achan table, and pulled open the drawer beneath. The deed, the trust documents, the realtor's card I'd kept for years. I traced Richard's name once. Rebecca thought Christmas was about control. She was wrong. Christmas was about truth, and mine was finally clear. Christmas morning arrived without joy. I woke before anyone else, as I always had, but this time there was no excitement waiting for me. No urge to turn on the tree lights. No instinct to warm cinnamon rolls or hum carols while the house slowly stirred. Instead, laughter floated up from downstairs. Rebecca's laughter. Bright, confident, certain. I dressed slowly, choosing neutral colours. Nothing festive, nothing soft. As I made my way down the stairs, I felt like a guest walking into someone else's celebration. Rebecca stood in the kitchen with Linda, whispering over coffee. They stopped when they noticed me. "Good morning," I said. "Merry Christmas," Linda replied politely. Rebecca glanced at the clock. "Daniel took the kids to the park. We'll open gifts when they get back." I nodded. "I'll be out this morning." She looked up, surprised. "Oh? Where to?" "I have an appointment," I replied. She didn't ask with whom, she didn't need to. She assumed, as she had assumed everything else, that whatever I was doing was temporary, minor, and ultimately irrelevant. Outside, the air was crisp and clean. I drove 15 minutes into town, past streets dressed in lights and wreaths, to an office I hadn't visited in years. Susan Miller, real estate consultant. Susan looked up when she saw me and stood immediately. "Margaret Collins," she said warmly. "I wondered when I'd hear from you again." I think it's time, I said. She didn't rush me. She poured coffee, listened quietly, and let me speak. About the house, about Christmas Eve, about the feeling of being slowly erased from my own life. When I finished, she folded her hands. So, you're ready to sell? Yes, I said, but discreetly. Susan nodded. No signs, no noise, private listing. Relief settled into my chest. Not excitement, not fear. Relief. When I returned home, the driveway was full. Wrapping paper littered the living room floor. The children were loud and happy, blissfully unaware of the shift beneath their feet. Rebecca barely looked up when I entered. Later, Daniel pulled me aside. "Mum, Rebecca and I were talking," he said carefully. "Of course you were." "We've been thinking about enrolling the kids in a nearby school," he continued. "If we're going to be here more permanently." Permanently. "And we'd take care of the taxes," Rebecca added. "The maintenance. You wouldn't have to worry anymore." I studied their faces. "When were you planning to talk to me about this?" I asked. Rebecca smiled almost kindly. "We assumed you'd be relieved." Assumed. "I'll think about it," I said. That afternoon, while the children played upstairs, I heard Rebecca's voice again, sharp, confident, unguarded. "Yes, Mom," she said into the phone. "Once the house is officially ours, we'll renovate. Open concept. The guest room will become an office." The guest room? My room? I didn't interrupt her. I went into the study instead and opened the drawer where the folder rested. The papers felt heavier now, not with fear, but with authority. That evening, Rebecca announced, "We'll be hosting New Year's here too." Hosting. Again. I nodded. Of course. She mistook my calm for surrender. Later, alone in my room, I packed a small overnight bag. Documents, essentials, memories. Not because I was running, because I was preparing. Outside, Christmas lights blinked cheerfully, blind to what was unraveling inside those walls. I lay awake, thinking about how strange it was now that the house I fought so hard to keep had become the place I needed to leave in order to protect myself. But this wasn't retreat. It was positioning, because when people show you exactly how they value you, you should believe them. And this time, I did. The days after Christmas passed in a strange, heavy quiet. Not peaceful, calculated. Rebecca moved through the house as if everything had already been decided. Furniture was measured. Photos were shifted. Conversations happened just loud enough for me to hear, and just vague enough to deny. Silence, I realized, had become their permission. One afternoon, I sat in the living room knitting while Rebecca paced with her phone. "Yes, early spring would be perfect," she said. "We don't want to wait too long." She stopped when she noticed me listening. "Oh, it's just about work," she added casually. I smiled. "Of course." Daniel avoided my eyes more often now. When he spoke, it was brief, functional, like a man trying not to choose sides by pretending there were none. The children, however, noticed everything. "Grandma," Emily whispered one night, "are we moving here forever?" I looked at her sweet, anxious face and felt my chest tighten. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," I said honestly. That answer stayed with me. That week Susan called. "We have interest," she said calmly. "Serious interest." I closed my bedroom door before replying. "Proceed." It felt surreal, like setting a clock you couldn't hear ticking. At dinner that night, Rebecca laid her fork down deliberately. "So," she said, "we've been thinking about timelines." Daniel straightened. "Yeah, Mom, just practical stuff," Rebecca smiled. "With your health and all, it makes sense to transition slowly." My health. I took a sip of water before speaking. "Transition to what?" "To us taking over," she said gently. Eventually. Eventually had arrived without asking. And where would I be? I asked. There it was again, that pause. "Well," Rebecca said, "this house is big, you could stay. For now." For now. I nodded. That's thoughtful. Daniel exhaled, relieved. They mistook my calm for agreement. Later that night, I walked through the house alone. I stopped at the hallway mirror, the same one I'd used to fix Daniel's tie before his first job interview. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Not weak, just tired of explaining her worth. The next morning, a folder appeared on the counter. Estate planning documents, sticky notes marked with yellow tabs, Rebecca's handwriting. "Just ideas," she said brightly. "No rush." I picked up the folder and felt something inside me finally settle. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was erasure. That afternoon, I drove to the bank and updated instructions I'd hoped never to need. Then I stopped by Susan's office again. "They assume they have time," I told her. Susan smiled thinly. "People always do." When I returned home, Rebecca was excited. "My parents are coming for New Year's," she announced. "We'll host here again." Again. I looked around the living room, my furniture, my walls, my memories, slowly being rewritten without my consent. "Rebecca," I said calmly, "have you ever considered that some things don't belong to the loudest voice in the room?" She blinked, confused. "I'm not sure what you mean." I smiled. "That's all right." That night, I packed another bag, not to leave permanently, but to remind myself I could. Because when people stop asking, they've already decided. And when silence is taken as permission, sometimes the only answer left is action. The first showing happened on a Tuesday, no signs, no flyers, no whispers in the neighbourhood. Susan handled everything quietly, the way I had asked. The buyers were serious, discreet, and prepared to move fast. People who didn't see the house as a promise, but as a purchase. I wasn't home when they came. I sat in a small cafe across town, hands wrapped around a mug I barely tasted, watching the door every time it opened. Not because I was nervous, but because I was finally doing something that belonged only to me. Susan texted just one word: interested. When I returned home, Rebecca was unusually cheerful. "You should have seen the kids today," she said. "They're really settling in." Settling in. "As they should," I replied. She studied me for a moment, as if trying to read something that wasn't there. Then she shrugged it off. "Confidence returned easily when you believe the ground beneath you is permanent." That evening, Daniel brought up renovations again. "I talked to a contractor," he said. "Nothing major at first, just opening the kitchen." The kitchen. The room where I had burned my hands, cried silently, celebrated promotions, mourned losses. "When?" I asked. "Early spring," Rebecca answered. "We want everything ready before summer." I smiled. "Spring is a season of change." They laughed. They thought I was agreeing. The second showing happened 2 days later. Then the third. Each time I left quietly. Each time I returned to a house that felt less like it was being taken from me, and more like it was slowly releasing me. Susan called again on Friday. "They want to make an offer." I closed my eyes. "Then let them. They're flexible on closing," she added. "But they'd prefer sooner, rather than later." "So would I said. That night, Rebecca hosted another dinner. Her parents praised the house openly. "You've done well," Thomas said to Daniel. "This place will hold your family for decades." Rebecca squeezed Daniel's hand. I watched them from across the table, calm as stone. After dessert, Rebecca pulled out a folder. "We've drafted some ideas," she said brightly, "just to be prepared." Prepared for what was already gone. I glanced at the folder and pushed it back toward her. "No need," I said. She laughed. "Oh, Margaret, it's just planning." Planning. That word again. Later, as the house slept, I stood alone in the living room. The tree was still up, lights dimmed, ornaments reflecting fragments of my face. I touched the wall once, then twice. "Thank you," I whispered. Not to the house, but to the life it had carried. Upstairs, Rebecca slept peacefully. She had no idea, because while she was planning for ownership, I had already signed the future away from her. And the house, the one she thought was waiting for her. was already preparing to belong to someone else. The offer came in on a Sunday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the same one where Rebecca had laid out her plans, her folders, her assumptions. Sunlight spilled across the wood, catching every scratch I had earned over decades. Susan's voice was steady, professional. "They're offering full asking," she said. "No contingencies. Cash." I closed my eyes. "And the timeline?" I asked. 30 days. Flexible if you want faster." 30 days. A lifetime for them. A decision already made for me. "Accept it," I said. There was a pause. "Are you sure, Margaret?" "I've never been more sure of anything." We went through the details carefully. Signatures, initials, dates. Each pen stroke felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd been surrendering piece by piece. When I hung up, the house felt different. Not hollow. Honest. That afternoon, Daniel suggested a family meeting. Rebecca sat straight-backed on the sofa, legal pad ready. Her parents weren't there this time. This wasn't a performance. "Mum," Daniel began, "we need to talk about the future." Rebecca nodded. "We've been patient, but we need clarity." "Clarity." I folded my hands. "Go on." "We need to know your plans," Rebecca said, "so we can plan ours." I met her eyes. "My plans are already in motion." She smiled, relieved. "That's good. We assumed—" "You shouldn't have," I said gently. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I continued calmly, "that assumptions have been doing a lot of work in this house lately." Rebecca shifted. "Margaret, if this is about Christmas—" "It isn't," I said. "It's about ownership." The word hung between us. Rebecca laughed lightly. "Well, yes. Eventually." "No," I replied. "Not eventually." Daniel leaned forward. "Mom?" I stood. "The house is under contract." Silence crashed into the room. Rebecca's smile froze. "Under what?" she asked. "Contract," I repeated. "It's being sold." Her laugh came too quickly. "That's not funny." "It's not a joke." Daniel stood abruptly. "You can't just sell the house." "I can," I said, "because it's mine." Rebecca's colour drained. "We live here," she said. "The kids—" "You're visiting," I replied. "And you made it very clear where I fit." Daniel rubbed his face. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" I thought of Christmas Eve, the stairs, the word fit. "You didn't ask," I said. Rebecca's voice sharpened. "You did this behind our backs." "No," I said quietly. "I did this after you erased me from my own life." The room felt smaller. Rebecca's legal pad slid to the floor, forgotten. "This was supposed to be ours," she whispered. I met her gaze, steady and calm. "It was supposed to be my home." The silence didn't last long. Rebecca stood first. "This is unbelievable," she said sharply. "You made a life-altering decision without consulting us." I stayed seated. "Interesting," I replied. "Because every life-altering decision in this house recently was made without consulting me." Daniel's voice cracked. "Mom, the kids think this is their home." "They were told that," I said calmly. "By you." Rebecca paced the room like a caged animal. "You're punishing us," she accused, "over one misunderstanding." "One misunderstanding," I echoed. I stood now. "Rebecca, you told me I didn't fit into my own family's Christmas. You asked me to leave my house so you could host." "That's not what I meant," she snapped. "But it's what you did." Daniel looked between us, torn. "We thought you wanted us here," he said quietly. "I wanted family," I answered. "Not replacement." Rebecca's tone shifted. Softer. Dangerous. "So what now?" she asked. "We just pack up? Disrupt the children?" I held her gaze. "You planned renovations without permission. You discussed schools. You spoke about ownership like it was already decided." Her jaw tightened. "I assumed," she said. "Yes," I replied. "You did." Daniel sank onto the sofa. "We can fix this," he said. "We can apologize. We can include you." "Include? Like a guest?" "The offer's been accepted," I said. "There's no fixing that." Rebecca's voice rose. You're choosing strangers over your own son. I shook my head. No, I'm choosing dignity, she scoffed. At your age, starting over is dangerous. That one landed. Daniel looked up sharply. Rebecca. But I smiled. Not weak, not wounded. Dangerous was staying where I was invisible, I said. The children appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the raised voices. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Are we leaving, Grandma? I walked to her and knelt. No, sweetheart, I said softly. Grandma is choosing herself. Rebecca's anger flickered, replaced by panic. When do we have to be out? She asked. Before closing, I replied. 30 days. Daniel stared at the floor. Rebecca whispered. You planned this? Yes, I said, because someone had to. She grabbed her coat. I never thought you'd do something like this, she said. I looked at her calmly. I never thought I'd have to. She left the room. Daniel stayed behind. I failed you, he said quietly. I touched his arm. You forgot who raised you, I said, but you remembered just in time. The house felt different now, not controlled, released. The packing began the next morning. Not rushed, not loud, just heavy. Suitcases lined the hallway like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish. Rebecca moved efficiently, clipped and silent, speaking only when necessary. Daniel followed behind her, slower now, like someone realizing too late that the ground had shifted under his feet. The children didn't understand timelines or contracts. They only understood loss. Emily sat on the stairs hugging a stuffed rabbit. Are we really leaving, Grandma? Yes, I said softly, but that doesn't mean we're gone from each other. She nodded, unconvinced. Noah avoided everyone, angry in the way only children can be. Loud silence, slamming drawers. Lucas cried when Rebecca told him his room was temporary. Temporary. That word again. Rebecca avoided me until the third day. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed. I hope you're happy, she said. I looked up from the table where I was sorting old photographs. I'm at peace, I replied. There's a difference, she scoffed. You could have talked to us. I tried, I said calmly. You talked over me. Daniel joined us quietly. Mum, he said, the kids want to say goodbye. Properly. I nodded. That evening we gathered in the living room. The tree was gone now. The room felt larger without it, emptier but honest. Emily hugged me tightly. I'll still come for Christmas, right? Yes, I said, if I'm invited. She didn't understand the weight of that sentence. I hoped one day she would. And do better. Noah mumbled goodbye. Lucas cried openly. Rebecca stood back, arms folded. Daniel lingered last. I thought this was my future, he said quietly. So did I replied. He nodded slowly. I forgot. It was yours first. He hugged me, longer than expected. Real. They left early the next morning. The house exhaled. For the first time in weeks, there was no schedule, no plans, no assumptions walking through my halls. Just silence. But this time, it wasn't permission. It was peace. I walked from room to room, touching walls, windows, door frames, not in grief, but in gratitude. This house had carried me long enough. Soon it would carry someone else. And that was okay, because what mattered most was that I was leaving it on my own terms. The closing day arrived quietly. No celebration, no regret, just clarity. I stood in the empty living room one last time, the echo of my footsteps following me like memories refusing to rush away. Sunlight streamed through bare windows, touching walls that had witnessed everything: grief, laughter, survival. Susan met me at the door. They never reached out, she said gently. I know, I replied. The paperwork was quick, clean, final. With one last signature, the house stopped being my responsibility and became my choice. As I handed over the keys, I didn't cry. I smiled, because for the first time in a long while, nothing was being taken from me. I was letting go. Later that evening, I sat in my new apartment. Small, bright, peaceful. A Christmas card sat on the counter. From Emily. Grandma, I'm sorry you felt left out. I love you. I held it close. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. I understand now. I'm sorry we assumed. I typed back carefully. Homes are built with respect, not expectations. Outside, snow fell softly. Somewhere, Rebecca was probably explaining to her parents how things had gone unexpectedly. But the truth was simple. They didn't lose a house. They lost the right to assume it was ever theirs. And I didn't lose my family. I just refused to disappear to keep them comfortable. That night, I hung one ornament on a small plant by the window. Just one. Enough to remind myself of something important. Belonging isn't about fitting into someone else's plans. It's about being valued where you stand. And this time, I was exactly where I belonged. Months passed. Spring came quietly, the way healing often does, without announcements. I settled into my new life slowly. The apartment never tried to impress anyone. No long hallways, no expectations hiding behind walls, just light, warmth, and peace. Daniel visited once, alone. Rebecca stayed in Boston. He didn't say her name, but I didn't need him to. They're renting now, he told me. Short term. I nodded. Homes built on assumptions never last long. He looked around my apartment. You seem lighter. I am, I said, because I'm not trying to earn my place anymore. He swallowed. Rebecca didn't think you'd really do it. I know, I replied. That was the problem. That Christmas, I received a message from Emily again. Grandma, Mom says families don't always agree, but they should still respect each other. I smiled. Rebecca never apologized, but she stopped assuming. And sometimes, that's the only apology people are capable of. On Christmas Eve, I cooked a small meal, just enough for one. I placed a candle by the window and turned on soft music, the kind that doesn't demand attention. Outside, families gathered, traditions continued, but inside, something new existed. Freedom. The house I sold was renovated. I saw photos online. Open concept, white walls, no trace of me. And that was okay, because the most important thing I carried out of that house wasn't furniture, wasn't memories, it was myself. And the lesson Rebecca never learned out loud, but felt deeply, was simple. You can inherit property, but you can't inherit entitlement. That has to be unlearned. And sometimes, the cost of assuming something was yours is losing it forever.